Hey, welcome to this webinar. I'm your presenter, Pete Bruno, and this topic today is TMCR development for S1000D projects. Today's release date is November 30th, 2018. So, Technical Manual Contract Requirements, or TMCRs, bring together specifications and definitions that are applicable to your technical manual product the government is trying to acquire. All procurements of tech manuals, change packages, and revisions require a TMCR. So TMCR is an actual acquisition document that is uniquely tailored to describe the format, style, and technical content requirements for that manual or for that IETM, which we'll be talking about today. The TMCR must be in conjunction with the procedurals and the statement of work. So actually the TMCR becomes a part of the contract. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Prior to developing your TMCR or your project or your IETM for the contractor, you're going to need to understand the TMCR requirements, and it should be a prerequisite before proceeding with any kind of development project, IETM, or tech manual. So there's going to be a lot of questions that are asked during the development effort, and what we're going to do is try to answer or address these questions today regarding specific S1000D specifications that you might include into your project. So there are standard boilerplate statements, and we're going to talk about those here in the next couple of slides. Writing a complete and accurate TMCR starts with questions, like I just said, not answers. The practice of simply cutting and pasting previous requirements or the use of what they call boilerplate language without first ensuring they are relevant to the system or equipment being acquired is inefficient and usually results in poorly written, redundant, and contradictory contract requirements. So you can use this boilerplate language that are laid out in Department of the Navy, Department of the Air Force specs that have, guidelines for your TMCR, but you're definitely going to want to pay attention to the S1000D piece, because as S1000D changes and adds more functionality and capability to the specification, it might not make it into these standard boilerplate statements. So right on to the questions. So the first question should be, what is the scope of the project? Okay, so you should include a statement that for the TMCR that reads something similar to: the requirements contained in this TMCR apply to all technical manual information required for the support, operation, and maintenance of the project. But be specific. Be very specific in what the title of the project is and any details that you think are pertinent to include into the scope statement. Okay, next question you should be asking yourself if you're writing a TMCR is, what is the type of contract or line item that the TMCR is going to support? So the type of contract required for the tech manual should be included, or for the IETM, should be included into the TMCR. So if you're using a research, development, test, and evaluation contract, or a BOA, or what's called a basic ordering agreement, you could be on a time and material contract, a requirements contract, or maybe as per the Navy uses a national contract vehicle to acquire some of its tech manual pubs. But it's important to include it into the TMCR language. Okay, so for what program phase will the TMCR be written to support? You want to include that into the language, whether it's concept refinement, technology development, system development and demonstration, product and deployment, production, and or major modification. All right, here's an important one. What is the period of performance for the project? You want to include anything regarding the period of performance from the start, milestones, review dates, final delivery date. Okay, this is a pretty big one, because your contractor that's executing the program needs to know what the delivery dates are, so he can maintain and monitor that performance of the project. All right. So, which spec or standard and other applicable documents will be used to develop the tech manual information? So, based on the existing concept of operations or an approved business case analysis, the data that's prepared for the government shall be in accordance with. Okay, this is where you would lay in what spec you want the contractor to write to. So, for today, we're talking about the S1000D. That's the international specification for tech pubs utilizing a common source database. This is where you would put the MIL standard 3001 or the MIL DTL 81310 or whatever spec you're trying to have your contract written to. Or your data is written to this specification. And then any other specs that you want the development team to adhere to. So if you want to lay in the simplified technical English spec and some other QA specs, a 604 manual, and so on and so forth, you would put that in this section. Okay, so since we're talking about S1000D, we're laying that in there, right? We want our contractor to use the S1000D spec. You want to make sure you be very specific on what issue number to write to. So S1000D is it goes through a review process and improves on itself, and they issue new or they assign new issue numbers to that specific date and time release of that spec. So right now, S1000D has released 2018 issue 4.2. So there are some considerable changes to issue 4.2, but this is something in the TMCR that you want to include. Okay, so we want them to write to either issue 4.2, 4.1, all the way back, and some projects are still on issue 3.0. All right. In addition, of course, the next question, to what maintenance level will the technical manual support or the information be required to support? So are we writing it for an organizational level maintenance manual, an intermediate, or a depot maintenance level manual? You got to lay that stuff into the TMCR and be real specific about what level of maintenance that you want your team to write to. So next question, right, in the same line of what level of maintenance, what are we writing to? What is the type of system or equipment that we're writing the IETM for? And what specific type of acquisition is required for the project? So the first piece is it a major weapon system, airborne system equipment, airborne system component, support equipment? Is it a test box? Is it something in those categories? And then what type of acquisition is this project for? Is it a brand new book, a new acquisition? Is it a revision of an IETM? Is it an update? Is it maybe it's a conversion of some legacy data into digital format, or a conversion into the S1000D format? Okay, so that stuff needs to be specifically laid out inside the TMCR. All right, so this one's more specific to the S1000D spec, and that question is, what type of information data sets will be developed? You want to include those applicable information data sets from your data. So what is an information data set? All it is a category of what information you're writing. Is it a description of function of a component? Is it a theory of operation? These are information sets. Is it maintenance procedures? Is it fault isolation? It could be wiring data. It could be corrosion control procedures, or it could be an illustrated parts data module, which includes all of the parts in that system or subsystem. So you want to identify those particular information data sets you would like the TMCR to address. Okay, you leave these out, it's kind of it leaves the program to interpretation, and you want to really remove any kind of interpretation of the specifications or the execution of the contract via the TMCR. Okay. Will additional tech manual data be required to supplement the IETM? The S1000D specification is pretty awesome when it comes to referring to paper or external pubs, you could do that within the tag sets and the attributes inside the specification. So if there's a commercial off-the-shelf manual or there's a general series manual that you want to refer to as a prerequisite to accomplishing a certain task, and I'll give you an example. If there's you're installing a component, and prior to the installation of the component, you want to make sure it's treated properly for corrosion preventative measures, you would maybe refer like a clean and treat procedure to another general series manual. And there are areas in the S1000D specification under the prerequisites for these external publication references. So you got to be really specific. This might take a little bit of planning on your part. Like you have to have a little vision or foresight onto what you want or what general series manuals you potentially could use in the future. Is government furnished documentation or software necessary for the IETM development? Great question. If it's a Navy program, you are probably going to use the NavAir standard IETM viewer. But if it's an Air Force, they have their own proprietary viewers. There might be some documentation that you don't have that's maybe restricted distribution that you need to have to accomplish the project. So this is where you would identify that into the TMCR. Any kind of specific software that or government furnished information or documentation you would not readily be available unless you were under contract. How will the tech manual data for the system or equipment be packaged? Okay, of course, the S1000D information data sets are divided into discrete pieces of information. We call them data modules. So what a data module is really the smallest self-contained information unit within the tech pub. They're like Lego blocks in legacy data development or tech pub development. You might refer them to work packages. It's a little bit more specific than work packages, but very similar. So how am I going to deliver that? In S1000D products, we have what's called a data module requirement list. That's pretty much an inventory of everything that's in the pub, in the IETM. So you would deliver that DMRL and then, be specific on, okay, we want all the deliverables, whether they're in their raw format or in their, more developed formats. So you would have DMCs, packaged up in the common source database and then deliver that, or whether it's a zip file or however that you specifically would like it delivered. I've seen it many, many different ways. Okay, but be specific in the TMCR. What type of business rules should be incorporated in the TMCR? Now, this would take a little bit of time if it's not an already established IETM program of record. So if you're a new program management team and you're trying to acquire your first IETM, there's some national contract stuff that has business rules that's already complete. But if you're project specific and you want to include some business rules, this is where it takes a little bit of time. So there's two different sources for business rule decision points in the S1000D spec itself: explicit and implicit, and we'll talk about a little bit about those here. There's been several sets of business rules with a hierarchy, right? So S1000D is all the way at the top, right? It's very broad, and then it starts going down specific. You got DoD business rules that are specific to Department of Defense. Then if it's a Navy project, the Navy comes in and says these business rules are in play. Of course, NavAir follows in there, and NavAir puts their business rules into play. And then, of course, your activity or your cognizant field activity, the people that are really managing that specific piece of equipment or platform. And those project-specific business rules might come into play also. Will the business rules require modification during the life of the contract? So after all the business rules have been documented and resolved, the rules should be stable enough to execute the contract so both the government and the contractor understand all the expectations. But, however, with any project, things come up, situations arise that drive changes in business rules throughout the development and life cycle of the project. So business rules can change. Changes in policy, changes in equipment, changes in technology, and some of the events that that will drive a business rule change. So just be flexible. Requirements for updating of the business rules document should be provided in the TMCR. So, a general statement that says, during the execution of the project, business rules might change based on, what I just talked about. So, what IETM functionality is required for the project? So, Class 4 IETM is a fully functioning interactive pub with some type of viewer attached to it. So the S1000D specification provides for a huge amount of functionality within the XML tags, attributes, that you can incorporate. So those levels of interactivity between the data and the user have to be really defined. The degree of that interactivity and functionality should commensurate with the maintenance philosophy for the weapon system and, be made available through project funding. So what we have in the DoD is called a functionality matrix, and that's intended to indicate the possible various capabilities of what your tech data should be doing as it acts inside the viewer. All right. So that functionality matrix is provided in the S1000D and allows your projects to define their functionality in specific language. It's more or less a shopping list. Just remember, the more stuff you add in functionality, the more time it's going to take to develop that content. Okay. And there you have it. So functionality, big deal in the TMCR, because there might be something later on in the project that, you didn't know about, because, to be honest, the spec is 3,500 pages long. The issue 4.2 is 3,500 and something changes, or some 3,500 and some odd pages of direction. So you might not know every single attribute or functionality that's capable of being provided by the S1000D specification. Is the tech manual content and product plan or outline required? So the technical manual content and product plan is developed by the contractor, all right, and provides specific system equipment technical content coverage in accordance with the S1000D spec. So this is commonly referred to as a book plan in the commercial world. So you have to lay out the way your book or your IETM is going to look, right? So most IETMs in aviation commercial world are developed within the ATA structure, the Air Transportation Association structure, with definitive chapter identification for engines or electrical components, and those are really what's driving the specification, is that standard numbering system. So that should be included in your tech manual content and product plan as your SNS layout of the ATA chapters. Okay, so there is some boilerplate language out there, but if it's a piece of equipment for a major revision that's being developed to, then it's, those chapters and that numbering system can be identified without even developing the content yet, in the tech manual content and product plan, and you need to establish that language in the TMCR. All right. So what quality assurance requirements are required for the project? So a requirement for QA should be established between the government and the contractor through the TMCR process. So you need to have a QA program defined in your TMCR, and usually there's either a DoD adopted program or an ISO 9000 series kind of quality management system that's implemented by the contractor. But a QA program is a must, is a shall. You need to have that in the TMCR, because with no appropriate QA program defined, kind of leaves all of that development work unchecked. Okay, And we know the 604 manual for the Navy specs talks about verification, first verification, second verification as it comes to S1000D projects. Does the aircraft or equipment contract cite the quality management and quality assurance standards as the QA requirements? That's what we just talked about. So if the contract does cite quality management and quality assurance standards, use the boilerplate statement for a total QA program in the template. But you can use that boilerplate, but if you got something you want to add to it in the TMCR, by all means, lay it in there. The more specific, the better it is for the contractor to understand, and it leaves less questions at the first IPR, second IPR, in-process review, or upon the final delivery of the project. Is contractor configuration control required to ensure positive control of changes to IETMs for the project? So through the development cycle of IETMs, it might be necessary to change or maybe required through the issuance of ECPs, TPDRs, TDs, and RACs, IRACs to make those changes. So you got to establish some boilerplate language in the TMCR that identifies this. Now, that is if it's a sustainment contract. If it's just an acquisition contract for the initial development of a system, then maybe TPDRs don't apply because it's not a IETM of record yet. So every project is going to dictate different criteria. Are technical manual identifications numbers assignments required? Do we need to have a manual ID number assigned? Well, they're required for each new tech manual under development. So we just said if it's a revision, we're already going to know what those numbers are. If it's an initial acquisition, then no, the program office or the logistic element manager has to go through that process to identify what that publication number is going to be. That's not going to be a contractor responsibility. That's going to be on the government to ID and name the pub. So what are the required delivery requirements and schedule? We said this a little earlier with your period of performance. This gets a little bit more specific. You want to lay in everything, your delivery requirements in here. And we've already touched a little bit about it, whether it's going to be a CD-ROM, a DVD database, any kind of specifics that you want delivered from that project development, you got to lay in here. Okay? And what are the required sustainment deliverables? Include anything like, all the paperwork that, for rapid access changes, revisions, any kind of TPDRs, anything like that. And we've already addressed this question: are changes or revisions required for the IETMs? It depends on what type of project you're developing to. Like I said, this is a repetitive from a couple slides ago. If it's a sustainment, then yes. If it is not, and if it's initial acquisition, then no. So you also have to put in who is going to be the government logistic element manager for the project. So you're going to lay the person's name, activity, address, phone number. Be specific. This is kind of not open to interpretation. So this is where you would use that boilerplate language to identify your logistic element manager. Okay, same thing here. Who is the cognizant field activity, or who is the CFA? So you're going to provide the CFA responsible for the activity in the tech manual information section of that TMCR. Once again, use a boilerplate language. And any additional requirements. So, there could potentially be a lot of additional requirements for the TMCR. It just depends on how complex your project is, or how complex the acquisition is. If it's a major revision or a major change to an airplane, then absolutely there's probably a lot of other information that you could put in there. such as software interoperability. We talked about that a little earlier about, government furnished documents and software being provided, but there might be some statements for interoperability and then any kind of transmittal instructions for that software. You also have some classification stuff. If it's a, restricted distribution project, you want to definitely lay in some of that language into this other section or additional section. And that is it for OpArrow's first webinar on TMCR requirements when developing an S1000D project. So takeaways here, everybody, is, it's pretty specific in the manuals. You could find a lot of what TMCRs are about at the Defense Acquisition University. They've got a great section on tech manual acquisition. So go check that out. And if you have any questions or you need any kind of guidance or consultation on TMCRs, give us a call at OpArrow. You can check our website out at www.oparrow.com. Once again, I'm your presenter, Pete Bruno, and thank you very much for listening and participating in this first series today. Thank you.